Okay, so today we're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. Yesterday you were finding info to be able to graph. Today we're going to find that same information a little bit more and use it to get a graph. When I ask you to graph a transformation of sine or cosine, I don't need a graph as detailed as your parent graphs. I just want a good sketch. And it's mainly going to come from, do you remember the quadrantal points, and can you accurately label your axes? Because they pretty much always look the same. It's just where they fall and how your axes are labeled. So in your composition book, we're going to work on a worksheet that's like front and back, so you're going to be able to fold it and stick it in a pocket. So in your composition book, you're going to make a pocket, like we've done several times before, and then tell yourself that in there is graphing transformations of sine and cosine. And then this is just to help you remember what the basic graph looks like without all of the extra points. So your parent graph test, which is November the 6th, you're going to have to graph very specifically those sine and cosine and tangent and secant, cosecant, cotangent graphs that we did on Wednesday. But if I'm asking you to graph a transformation, then I just want a generic, basic, not all of the points graph. So for sine, remember that we start at 0, and then we go up, back to 0, down, back to 0. So all I need you to remember for sine is that you're going to go 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 1. And that covers from 0 to 360. So you're going to have to mark it to where you have 4 sections. So 5 marks. That'll cover 0 to 360, like counting by 90s. And so that's just the quadrantal points that you really need to know. So 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0. All right. This does not help me at all, but it's something that we found on the internet a few years ago that has helped some kids. So it's I can't remember what the I stands for, honestly. I honestly have no idea. So don't worry about this. Pretend like that's not there, because I can't remember how to explain it to you. It never really helped me anyway. All right, so again, for sine, it's 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0. For cosine, it started at 1, so it's going to go 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. You just need to remember what the basic shapes look like and where those 1s and 0s are for graphing transformations. Again, for graphing for your parent function test, you got to know all of those points that we did on Wednesday. All right, so on to actually graphing. So this worksheet. If you don't have a printer and can't print this, then you can just write the problems on your own paper. We're just sketching graphs anyway, so you don't even really need graph paper. Sometimes graph paper actually makes it a little harder to get a sketch of these because you are working too hard, honestly. All right, so we learned yesterday how to find amplitude. So it's the number that's right in front of sine. So in this one, it's an understood 1. The period is the normal period divided by this number, which again is an understood 1, so you just have a period of 360. Increments is new. Increments, think quarters, because you're dividing it into 4 equal parts. So we're going to take the period of our function and divide it into 4 equal parts. Phase shift, we take what's in parentheses and equal it to 0. So we get 45 degrees. Vertical displacement is this extra number, so a +1. Midline is going to be your vertical displacement, but as an equation. The max and min, it's going to be the maximum point and the minimum point, which is what those big N's and little N's are standing for, but I still can't remember what the I stands for. So max, like the highest point on your graph, if the midline is 1 and the amplitude, which tells you how high and how low to go, is 1, then the maximum would be 2. The minimum, if the middle is at 1 and we go down 1, then the minimum would be at 0. Sorry. All right, so we are going to, this is how this information works. We are going to remember, first of all, this is reflected, so make sure that you remind yourself that because you'll forget when you go to graph if you haven't written it down in your info. All right, so to get a graph, we need an x-axis. We are going to have a positive phase shift, so we can put our x-axis over here. So this is 0. To label your x-axis, you're going to start with your phase shift number. You're going to count by your increment number until you have covered 360 degrees. All right, so your phase shift tells you the first number that you're going to write down. And then from there, you count by your increments so that you have 5 numbers written down. So you're going to add that 90 4 times. So 45, if you add 90 4 times, we are going to be at 135, 225, 315, and 405. So our period is 360. So from 45 to 405 is 360 degrees. All right, so again, start with your phase shift, count by your increments. You should cover the period. All right, so all of that information tells you how to label your x-axis. To label your y-axis, you're going to have your midline is like the middle. That's like where your x-axis kind of shifts to. And then your amplitude is 1. So from that midline, you go up 1 and you go down 1. I wanted to see right over here. And now you have your high-low points. All right, so this is a sine graph. So sine starts at 0. So our 0 has moved up to 1 because of our vertical displacement. Now normally sine, we would go up and back to 0, down and back to 0. But because we're reflected, we're going to go down and then to 0 and then up and then to 0. And then you just make a smooth curve through those points. And you're done. This looks a hot mess. Let me fix it. Okay. All right, so there's one graph. All right, so let's try another one. I'm going to do 4 with you, and then the other 2 that we don't do in this video is going to be the homework for tonight. All right, so for this one, we have an amplitude of 1, and it's positive, so it's not going to be reflected. We have a period of 360 because there's no number in front of the x. Our increments are 90 because 360 divided by 4 is 90. Our phase shift is negative 180 because if you take this and equal it to 0, you get negative 180. Our vertical displacement is 0 because there's no extra number added or subtracted, which means our midline is y equals 0. Our maximum is 1, and our minimum is negative 1. 0 plus 1 is 1, 0 minus 1 is negative 1. All right, so we need an x-axis, we need a y-axis, but our phase shift is back up 180, so I'm going to put our y-axis kind of more in the middle. All right, so here's negative 180. We're going to count by 90. So be negative 90, 0, 90. What is that? 1, 2, 3, I need one more. So 180. All All right, so from negative 180 to positive 180 is 360 degrees. All right, so now our midline is 0, so our middle is still the x-axis. Our maximum is 1, and our minimum is negative 1. We have a sine graph, so we start at 0, and then we go up to 1, back to 0, down to negative 1, back to 0, and we draw our graph. All right, so again, you're doing basically the same thing every time. You're just relabeling your axes to make it the correct graph. So we're doing shifting and things like that, but since this graph just continually makes the same shape, it's really hard to show a shift, but just the way that you draw your axes is how you show your shifts and your stretches and things like that. All right, number 3. Amplitude is 1, but remember that it's reflected. Actually, I'll tell you what. I meant to take number 2 and put a 2 in front of it, so since I didn't there, let's put a 2, how about a 3? We'll put a 3 in front of this one. So we'll make this one say negative 3 before we get started. I don't know where my whiteout went. Alright, so my whiteout doesn't want to work. There it goes. Alright, let's change this to say, we'll just make this one positive for now. We'll just make it a 3. No, we'll make it negative because there's not another negative. Alright, so we want it to say negative 3 instead of just negative cosine. So that means our amplitude is 3 and it's reflected. Alright, our period, normal period, we're in radians, is 2 pi. Divide that by 2, so our period is pi. So we're going to get a whole cosine graph in pi units. Alright, our increments, always divide by 4. Because you're splitting it into the 4 quadrants of the unit circle. So you get pi divided by 4, so pi over 4. Phase shift, you take what's in parentheses, equal it to 0. And you get negative pi over 2. Alright, vertical displacement. We don't have one here. So our midline is 0. Alright, your maximum. You're going to take your amplitude and add it to your midline. Because amplitude is how far up and how far down you go, like from the middle. Like how tall are your hills, how low are your valleys. So our maximum is 3, and our minimum is negative 3. Alright, so drawing our picture, we're starting on the negative, so let's put our axes kind of in the middle. Alright, so we're going to back up, and how far you back up, you just kind of judge it a little. You know that you're starting at negative pi over 2 and counting by pi over 4, so go back enough that you can have 2 marks and write under them. So we say that negative pi over 2 is here. So negative pi over 4, 0, pi over 4, pi over 2. So we had a half, we added a fourth, so we're at a fourth, a negative fourth. Add a fourth, you're at 0, add a fourth, you're at a fourth, add a fourth, you're at 2/4, which is 1/2. From here to here, we covered pi. Alright, so our midline is 0. We're going to have a high point of 3 and a low point of negative 3. Alright, so the first one that you labeled is where you start. Your cosine graph, so you would like to start at pi, but it's reflected, so we're going to start down low. Normally it would be a 1, but since we have a multiplier of 3, an amplitude of 3, we're going to stretch it down to 3. Alright, then your next is at 0, and then we're at 3, and then we're at 0, and now we're at negative 3. I'm just following that cosine pattern, but upside down. And remember that cosine curves back up on the ends. So make sure you show that and don't make it look like a big old parabola. Alright, so we'll do one on the back, and then the other two will be for you to try for homework. Alright, so I'm going to give you a second, copy that number 4 down if you didn't print this paper. Pause the video because I'm not going to wait long enough for you to write it all down. Alright, and then also number 6, you need to write that one down because 4 and 6 is what you're going to do for homework tonight. Alright, so number 5, we have an amplitude of 2. We have a period of 2 pi because there's no number in front of the x. So our increments would be 2 pi over 4, which is just pi over 2. Phase shift, you take what's in parentheses, equal it to 0 and solve. Vertical displacement is 3, so your midline is y equals 3. So to get your maximum, you do 3 plus 2 is 5, because you start at 3 and you go up to your 5. You start at 3 and go down to 3 minus 2 is 1. I just said 1 and write 3. I understand. That was stupid. Alright. So on our graph, to label the x-axis, you look at your phase shift and your increments. So phase shift says to start at negative 3 pi over 2. Sometimes it's easier for people not to put their y-axis in until they're done labeling their x-axis. I'm okay if you go that route. So I'll do that this time so you can see that. Alright, so if I start at negative 3 pi over 2 and I add pi over 2. So negative 3 halves plus 1 half is negative 2 halves, which is just 1, or negative 1. Alright, if we add a half to negative 2 halves, we get negative 1 half. That's a pi, not a 7. If we add a half to that, we get 0. We add a half to that, we get pi over 2. So now we know that our y-axis should go through there. Alright, so putting your y-axis on after you label your x-axis is okay, if that's easier. Alright, so we need to go up to 5. And we need to go down to 1. And remember that our middle is at 3. So putting this dotted line for the middle is not necessary, but it's helpful for some people, so you can do it or you can leave it off. It's really up to you. Alright, so we are doing a cosine graph again. So cosine is going to start I labeled one at negative 1. Did you catch that? Fix it. Sorry. Okay, so cosine is going to start at pi. So we're going to start at the 5. We're going to come back to the middle. And then we're going to go down to our low point. And then back to the middle. And then up to our high point. And then cosine makes this thing that kind of looks like a little, I don't know, like a dog or a deer face, maybe. Do you see it? You got like a nose and some eyes and some ears. Alright, so I've given you 4 examples of how to graph. If you have questions about how to find any of this stuff, send me an email and let me know, and I'll type a response or record a little short video for you. If you have questions about how to label things or how to plot your points, if you have questions about anything, just let me know, and I don't mind trying to answer it via email or recording a short video explaining just that thing over again. Alright, so try 4 and 6. And I will, for those of you that are going to be quarantined for a while, try 4 and 6 and I'll post the answers, or you can email me yours and I'll look at them and give you feedback on them. Email them to me so you get points for doing homework, and I'll give you some feedback on them. Alright, please let me know if you have questions.